Okay, this is another statistics tutorial from for a question that I saw on Reddit from a user, I believe Xatu51. The question I just pasted in a cell up here. Basically, the original poster has a scatter plot, data for a scatter plot, and wants to calculate the sum of the squared x values, the sum of the squared y values, and the sum of the residuals of the x values, which is essentially each x value minus the average of the mean x value. Now, another Redditor correctly pointed out that by the definition of mean, this value, the sum of the residuals, should be 0. Now, in many statistical equations, you often see the sum of the residuals squared. So I suspect that's what the OP really means, so I'm going to show how to obtain both. This is a pretty basic Excel tutorial. It seems that the OP is a beginner at Excel, so I'm going to walk through some fundamentals here. Okay, the first thing to point out, I've got a column of x values and a column of y values. This can be a column, it could be an array, it could be rows. It doesn't matter the form, really. I just have a list of cells for the x and a list of cells for the y, and just a graph showing what this scatter plot would look like. These are just simulated data that I came up with. The first thing to tackle is the OP's first question, how to come up with the sum of the squared x values. And Excel has a formula built in for this, which is convenient. Now, an Excel formula is just an equation you can enter to cause Excel to do a computation, and they're pretty easy to input. You can either look them up from the formulas ribbon, which has a list of all of these different functions. You can mouse over each one to see what this function will actually do. And if you click on one from these lists, you can get a function arguments help box, which walks you through the steps to obtain the result of this function, and also a hot link to get the help file, the Office help file on that function. Now, these functions are pretty simple, so I'm actually just going to enter them as you normally would. To start a function, you enter the equal sign, and the sum of the x squared values is actually just one formula built into Excel, sum sq, and you can see that the text here is telling me what this is going to do, return the sum of the squares of the arguments. That's exactly what the OP wanted. So open parentheses to start the input arguments, clicking on the first x value, which is in cell A2, and then holding down the Control and Shift buttons and pushing the down arrow to jump automatically down to the end of this column where we have data entered. Now you can see that the formula input arguments have updated from A2 to A51. That's the entire range of x, and parentheses and enter gives me the final answer for the sum of x squared. Now I can do this same thing for y, and since this is a pretty easy formula, it's not really a time saver to do anything else, but you can see that I just entered basically the exact same thing but used a different column as my argument. But there's actually a shortcut which is really convenient for more complicated formulas when you start building them in Excel, and that is that Excel will assume if you copy a formula and paste it into another cell, it's going to assume that the arguments you requested are also going to move in that same direction by the same number of cells. So since I am interested, instead of this x column here, in this y column, I can just, in this y reference is one cell to the right, and this y column is one column to the right. I can just copy my x formula, paste it in the y cell. You can see that it's automatically updated to the b column instead of the a column for the x's. So that result is the exact same as I would have gotten had I just entered the formula manually. Now, the residuals can be done in a couple complicated ways using array formulas, but since the OP is probably a beginner in Excel, I'm just going to do the most fundamental way to calculate residuals, and that is by making a new column that is going to have each individual residual value in it. So to do that, it's just another formula, but now we're just going to be using arithmetic. So I'm interested in the difference between each individual x value and the average of all of the x values. So in order to get that formula, I just type in that number. I just type in a new formula, which is average, open parentheses, and just like before, I click my start, shift control down to get to my end, and close parentheses. Now there's one thing I have to do special here. Notice that I have the same format as before, this A2 colon A51. If I just click enter and fill this down by grabbing this little black box here and filling it down, you notice there's a problem. The average changed as well. So it went A3 minus the average of A3 to A52. But the reference A53 is A52 is beyond our range of x values. So we can't have that particular reference argument changing as we fill this formula down. So there's a fix to that. It's pretty easy. You just go back into your top formula, click on the reference you want to remain static, and hit F4. And each of these dollar signs tells you that this is not going to change as you move this formula around from cell to cell. So in front of the A, the dollar sign here means that if I moved left to right, the A would not change to B to C to D or anything else. It will remain as an A. And the dollar sign in front of the 2 will tell me that the 2 will not change as I move down from row to row. If I do the same thing with A51 over here, you now see that both of these are locked references. They're not going to change. And just as before, I can drag all the way down to the bottom here. And each of these formulas only updates as I move from row to row, this first reference, not the average reference. So that's exactly what I want. So here are the residuals. Now if I just summed those, it's just another formula, sum of all residuals. As I expected, it's 0. But the sum of squared residuals should not be 0. And this is used in all sorts of calculations, like I said, in statistics, such as calculating the variance and whatnot. To do this, there's another built-in formula. Just enter equals dev squared. Tells you what exactly we're going to be computing here. The sum of squared deviations from their sample mean. So each observation minus the mean of all observations squared, then summed. Dev squared, open parentheses, do my reference range just before, close parentheses, enter. So there is the sum of the residuals squared, and I encourage the OP to go in and see if this is really the number that they wanted to calculate. All right, hope that was helpful.